Want to know what the movers and shakers of New Hampshire's performing arts are thinking? Welcome to New Hampshire Unscripted with your host, Ray Dudley.
In this episode of New Hampshire Unscripted, I sit down with comedian Greg Boggis. Greg is a New England-based stand-up comic, actor, print model, writer, frequent contributor to Atlas Obscura, and a comedy show producer with almost 20 years of experience in the entertainment business. Some of the topics we cover are Greg's YouTube video series where he sits down with various comedians, talks about their experiences, their careers. We talk about the Strange Name movie. I'm going to leave that one right there. Greg drops a few names about people in the industry he's working with. Gilbert Gottfried is one. We talk about what it's like to do stand-up comedy in this crazy culture right now. We talk about comedians of old and new. And we talk about Greg's career and some of the things he wants to do in the future. Take a listen.
Well, my guest today is Greg Boggis. I'm so happy to have you. So happy to have you. Thank you for being here.
I'm glad to be here.
So, as I'm driving, I got my playlist on, and up pops Dean Martin.
Sure.
And he's doing something from Vegas. And I instantly thought about you. And do you ever, as a comedian, ever see those halcyon days of, like, the Rat Pack and all they got away with back then, and kind of wish you had been a part of that?
There's definitely eras that you look back and think it would have been really great to have been an entertainer. Because, especially as a comic, some of that stuff just seems like, people were just so ready to be entertained that you didn't, I don't want to say you didn't have to work hard, but it was just something that was such an easy, natural thing to do because it was new for so many people, And so I do see some of those periods and think, boy, that really would have been a fun time to have been around.
There was some classic stuff, too. And I don't know how much of it was off the cuff, but some of the stuff they say was just brilliant. Maybe it's just because they were comfortable with each other?
Yeah. That's a huge part of it. A huge part of being funny. If you're a naturally funny person, it's something that comes easy. And if you're with people that you're comfortable with, they bring it out of you and you bring it out of them.
Yeah.
And you have, people that are straight people that set you up and aren't afraid to let you take the spotlight. I think that was what was great with Johnny Carson, right? Johnny Carson was a funny guy, but he wasn't afraid to have his guests come in and literally be the star. And you see that's sometimes people are a little less willing to do that these days, that they always want to, a lot of times the radio guys, they always want to have the last word and be the top of the heap. And there's a real skill to allowing other people to shine.
Thanks for the stuff you sent me.
Sure.
Loved the Boggis Hour. Do you still do it?
I haven't done it in some time. So it's a TV show I do out in Nashua. And it's really, just like this, it's really unscripted. I, generally find backgrounds of people that I like, and then just kind of have some ideas in my head. So it's not a real scripted thing. And sometimes that's really good for people because it I don't want to say it keeps them off guard, but it kind of keeps them honest. You know what I mean? If you're going in and if you've got this canned stuff that you're ready to talk about a particular show or a particular play or something you're doing, you're a little bit more in like promotion mode as opposed to just, and so that's what's nice about that. So I haven't done it in a while, but I actually started talking to the producers in Nashua, and so I am going to get back on it.
Was there an actual studio that, it looked pretty professional, the backdrop, the cameras.
And it's so funny because it's the Nashua Cable Access, which it's right next to the police station. So it's in the back part of the DPW. I'll give you a great story about it too. So it's in the back part of the DPW building, and it's very small. There's probably 4 or 5 offices, a conference room, studio, reception area, and then a control room. And it's all fixed cameras and run through the control room and green screen. So every show you pick out, they have a design guy named Dan Young, and you tell him what you want, and he produces a green screen program for your set.
That's nice.
Yeah, so he did a really great job. And he also shot and produced kind of the opening trailer. And then the music is from Nick David, who's Nick and the Dirty Tricks, if you ever saw that band out of Manchester.
I don't get out of my cave very much.
I'll drag you out. So to bring that back, I don't know if you saw, but one of the interviews I did during the elections in 2016 was with Vermin Supreme. If you don't know who Vermin Supreme was, he's I guess you call him a kind of a street performer. He's this very hippie-looking guy with a gray beard down to his mid-chest, and he wears like a ratty sport coat, and he wears a large black rubber boot on his head.
For real?
For real. And he actually gets on I think he's been on the presidential ballot for a number of years. So I think in New Hampshire it's $1,000 to get in the ballot. You know, his platform is mandatory toothbrushing. Everybody gets a pony. So in some ways, he's a very just an irreverent street artist. But in other ways, I know that he's been to some of the some of the heavy duty protest sites and actually has diffused kind of tension, tight situations between different groups and stuff like that. So he actually talked about that. But anyhow, so he's this real out there hippie cat, and he's coming to do my show, and he's got all these props. He's got like the little mannequin and dolls. And he's got flags, and so he's going back and forth, bringing it back in, and he's puffing a joint on the way in and the way out, and I'm walking with him. He wants some of this. I'm well, just to let you know, that is the police station right there.
Yeah, takes all kinds to make the world. So, you're a native of New Hampshire?
I am. I was born in Nashua.
Sorry.
Yeah, I know. My apologies.
How did you get into comedy?
I was a fan of comedy. I always liked to laugh. I was the youngest of 6 kids, and I don't know if you know anything about family kind of dynamics. A lot of times the youngest, they're not forgotten. I mean, they're almost like the family mascot a lot of times, you know. And so I was always a funny kid, and, into the probably early 70s or so, I started to enjoy comedy. So the family would watch All in the Family and the Carol Burnett Show and the Three Stooges. So all really great, solid comedy stuff. And then, a few years later, George Carlin and Cheech and Chong and Richard Pryor. And I remember listening to a Richard Pryor cassette with my brother Martin and my cousin Chris Daigle, probably 1973. So I'm 7 years old listening to some blue Cheech and Chong stuff. It was very, very entertaining. And then Steve Martin came around, and Steve Martin was like the first rock star comedy guy. And I remember sitting around with a family and a bunch of family friends listening to, it was probably his first album, and just remembering how much of a great time that was. It was just such a magical time to recall. And so I grew to really love comedy, and then ultimately Saturday Night Live and John Belushi and Animal House and the Blues Brothers. And so everything in my personal life kind of always pushed me towards liking comedy and ultimately wanting to be a comic. So I did one open mic in Boston in like 1989. Maybe 88 or 89, and I was still working construction with my brothers. We were building houses back in the housing boom in that period, and I just didn't quite gel that first time. And then so I did some plumbing for a couple of years, and then worked at Franklin Pierce College as a security officer. And one of my buddies came and visited me. He lived down in Somerville, and he'd broken up with his girlfriend and was looking for a roommate. And I just knew that I needed to start doing comedy, and the best way to do it is to get to where it's done. And Boston is considered one of the great breeding grounds for comedians. Everybody from Dennis Leary and Dane Cook to Paula Poundstone to Bobcat Goldthwait, Lenny Clark. There's just a ton of talented comics that have poured out of Boston. Patrice O'Neill, Bill Burr, Robert Kelly, Gary Gulman. Just a lot of really great comics. Barry Crimmins. So I moved down to Somerville and started doing stand-up. And, I did pretty well pretty early on, and kind of enough to get my foot in the business, and then in short term moved back to New Hampshire, but just, kept my hand in the comedy world, and then that's 20 years later, and I've been doing it and making money at it and having fun. And
how does somebody get that drive to stand up? Is brutal. You have to have, there's a certain makeup, because I don't have the constitution for it. I cannot take the rejection. I have a terrible time just auditioning for things.
Yeah.
I cannot take it. So how do you not have that fear of rejection? Because it's got to be huge.
Well, it's something that I think that's probably one of the fundamental things about comedy, is that you learn to deal with that, and that rejection is only a momentary thing. This crowd at this time isn't digging me.
Do you know that early on, though? You said, you kind of wanted to do it, and you had no fear?
No, you don't. No, you definitely, the learning curve is brutal. It is just like, oh, God, it's horrible. But you don't realize as you're doing it, what other people realize is that you go and you eat it, right? That's the term. You're doing bad. You're bombing. You're having a terrible set. It feels like your world is ending at that moment. But it's not, and that's literally, that's making your bones, that's getting your chop, that's a fundamental part of what it is to become a comic, is to go up in flames and to sweat and to stammer and to listen to the comics laughing at you as you try to save, try to salvage a horrible set. And And so once you learn that the consequences of having a bad set isn't, oh my God, you've had a bad set, you're out of the business. It's, oh no, that's an important part of the growth process, is learning how to deal with doing really, really bad and going up in big, big flames.
You have to be secure in yourself. I mean, really, I couldn't do it. I tried it once at Boston in the ComAv.
Not necessarily. Do you remember where you were? Was it Dick Doherty's vault? Or
I do not remember where it was. But I tried it once, and sweat pouring off me. Yeah. I'm spitting all over the mic. You know, everybody's talking. No one's paying. It's open mic night.
Right.
Everybody's talking to each other. They're not paying any attention to you. The only thing I can hear is the margarita blender going in the back bar of the bar. I thought I couldn't do this for a living. I mean, it's different, I guess, if you get famous and then people are coming to see you.
Sure. That's like the Dave Chappelle, scenario where he became so famous and people loved him so much that it didn't matter what he did, and then he kind of started to lose his bearing about what was actually funny because he'd just go up and read a recipe and people would be laughing. So there is a certain level of success where it can alter your ability to, what is funny. But, just on the way up, you keep at it and you record your sets and you listen to your sets and you go back and sometimes what you thought the crowd liked, you listen to it again, like, they didn't really laugh at that, but that's a joke that I like, and you do it a couple of times and you're not laughing. You're like, well, I guess it's a joke that I like, but the crowd doesn't. I jettison that. So you go back and you kind of, that's how you, even though it's a lot easier now, you get all kinds of digital things and you can record yourself a lot easier. And back then it was a cassette, and you'd tape your set and then drive home and listen to your set and like, I guess that was okay. And then you started to do the recording and things like that, and you'd kind of give yourself technical criticism about how you looked or how you can add more to your set by performing better.
I'm sweating just thinking about it. I am.
But the thing about it is, so even like with theater, like if you screw up in a play, you're like in real time, the other person is like, they're looking at you, they're burning holes to you, get the line right. Like with comedy, if you're screwing up, it's only you. So it is only you and the crowd, as opposed to these other, like your band, you're out of tune, your band is carping at you, come on, get it together. With stand-up comedy, you can always, if it's not going good, you can run and you can dance and you can make it happen again. You can try to salvage it and fool the crowd. And the other thing is that the cost benefit analysis is what are the consequences of a crowd not liking you? My brother's a police officer, and a bad day for him is getting into a fight with a guy who's got a communicable disease and is spitting blood at him during the fight, or slipping on the ice or having to run back to his cruiser because it's slipping in the ice down a hill, or actually having to pull a gun on somebody. Those are real consequences. The consequences of having a crappy stand-up set are really other than a bruised ego, and you realize, and so it does kind of give you some perspective about your being, is that your ego, an ego bruise is not an actual injury. It's something that is, it's an emotional ding. It's something to your psyche. And once you, again, do it even further, it's like big deal. So I didn't feel good because that crowd in Holton, Maine didn't dick me. I'll never see any of those people in that crowd again, and there's not going to be any consequences unless the booking agent says, hey, you're so terrible, I'm never going to use you again.
Yeah, so that's a really good perspective. I get that. I still would never do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely like, for me, theater is way, way much more intimidating for me because I'm also kind of a like fly by the seat of the pants kind of guy. So stand-up, it doesn't have to be, theater is scene A, B. Yeah, it's this really heavy-duty structure, and it's an interactive thing where you're reliant upon other people with cues and staging and all that. And stand-up is much more, I can start just talking to the crowd. Mm. I can start, with a bit that I usually do towards the end of my set, at the beginning of my set.
So you can freewheel.
Here you can. So I can start just making fun of the venue and, whatever, the cheesy posters they've got, or the horrible bathroom, or, the sketchy part of town it's in. There's all of those kind of things that you can do. And then or you can just work, talk to somebody in the crowd. And sometimes it can be incredibly funny. Other times it's sometimes they're funnier than you, and that's a pain in the ass.
Yeah, I could see that being a problem. There's a couple of things I really want to talk to you about. One is the evolution of comedy, because there's a lot going on nowadays. And I also want to talk to you, after watching your Boggis Hour, great interviews.
Oh, thank you.
Frank
Santarelli. Yeah, so that was the first. So I'm your Frank Santarelli. He was the first show that I did, the first interview, and it was really fun. He was a really fun interview. If you don't know Frank Santarelli, he's a New England-based comic originally from Cleveland, and he came to Boston in I think the early '80s. Had been working at a steel mill and decided to go to Cleveland stand-up night and did well. Came to Boston because Boston was a hot spot, and so he's had a long comedy career and also an acting career. And he was a regular on The Sopranos. He was the bartender called Georgie, who Tony always would beat the stuffing out of with fishes and phones, ice buckets. And just a really, he's got a lot of good, he's been around a long time. He's got a good memory, so he's got a lot of great, Hollywood stories and, working with James Gandolfini and that kind of stuff. So
and he's a great interview. I mean, he's very informative. Yeah. Loves to chat. He has great stories.
Yeah.
Two of them that came to mind was Peasy.
Oh, Johnny Peasy. Oh, yeah.
He's a mailman.
Right.
Leaves the post office, goes to a second job. Then he goes to a third job working at the liquor store, and then goes into stand-up comedy.
Yeah.
How does that happen?
Yeah, same thing. He was involved early on with Giggles Comedy Club, which is down at the Prince Restaurant in Saugus, and so he's a comic and a magician. So he does magic too, and so that's kind of like a whole other level of performance where you're not just doing straight stand-up, you're also kind of incorporating legerdemain and tricks and things like that. And so he's done Reno and Vegas and Atlantic City and all that. And so he's been around for a very long time and actually has his own club that he runs called LOL, Laugh Out Loud, at the China Blossom in North Andover.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. So I was there a couple weeks ago with Christine Hurley. If you haven't seen her, she's outstanding. Actually, that's one of the episodes, I think, on one of my shows.
Wasn't she supposed to come to the Hatbox and didn't make it? I went to the Hatbox, I remember a couple of performances ago, and some woman couldn't make it.
Oh, yeah, that was my friend Alana Foden, and she was actually had their last show. But, yeah, so Christine is, I don't know how to describe her, but she's a really powerful character. Performer.
Like a Roseanne?
Kind of like a Roseanne, yeah. She's very, but a little more, I don't know, I guess a little more likable than Roseanne. Roseanne kind of had a bit of a sour edge to it. And Christine is just very fun to be around off stage. And then she has this whole recurring thing about her husband, Jimmy, and his hijinks and all that. Mm-hmm. And so if you get a chance to see her, she's one of the top comics in Boston.
My mind is going a million different directions. There's so much to ask you about. You guys were just working Jeans, right? Jeans Playhouse?
Yes. Yeah.
How'd that go?
That was not bad. It was kind of a smaller crowd than usual, and I know that they said that it was kind of been a little bit off for kind of entertainment and all that for the past few weeks, and so I don't know whether the weather's gotten to people or what. But
so, what kind of a crowd? It's the end of February, early March. What kind of a crowd is up there for stand-up comedy?
Well, the thing is, it's a big ski resort area.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so, and this was the shows that I usually do twice a year are on Labor Day and Memorial Day. But this past week was New Hampshire's winter vacation. So parents and bringing their families and people getting away, going on vacation. So literally a stone's throw from Jeans is the Riverwalk. It's a big brand new hotel. It looks like the place out there shining.
Gorgeous, yeah.
And so when you do those shows, there's all kinds of touristy type of people that are in for in town to come to the shows. So.
Yeah. How do you like the Hatbox?
I love it. I really have a real affinity for intimate spots to do comedy. Because you can look people in the eye, the entire crowd, and look and kind of feel like you're just talking to them. And I think when you're that intimate, that close up, you become really comfortable. And I think when you're comfortable is often when you're all cylinders are firing. That's kind of when it's really working for you. And so almost every time I've been there, it's been just a really good time. And even with a 20-odd person crowd, it's still a nice, comfortable room. And that's another nice thing about a smaller venue is that even if you don't have a big crowd, it still works. If you have a 500-seat theater and you get 30 people in it, it's a tough sell. You have a 100-seat room and you get 30 people in it, man, that's a decent crowd.
So are they able to? I know they're still trying to find their feet, and get these crowds out, and they're very eclectic in the amount of things they have going on there. So it would be really nice. I don't know how they would ever accomplish it, but be able to get a bigger draw. I don't know if it's because it's in the mall or whatever it is.
Yeah, that's the right. Of course, the paradox of entertainment. It's a great thing when you see it But it's you got to get people to it, and how you do that, it's advertising, it's promotion, it's all these different things. And, in comedy, and Concord's not known as a hotbed for comedy,
Right.
but its art scene is definitely solid, and it's definitely there. But it's still, like comedy is kind of the weird, kind of the redheaded stepchild, no offense to redheads or stepchildren, of entertainment, you know what I mean? I think George Carlin called it a low art, and it's something that, like now almost every major theater does stand-up comedy, and it was something that 20 years ago, a lot of those big theaters weren't having comedians coming in. And so it is gaining respect as an American form of art that is something that's acceptable in the theater. But it's still, there's still a lot of people that, they think about it as, something in a divey bar,
Right.
some guy standing next to a popcorn machine.
Right,
and
a brick wall behind him. So that gets me into the evolution of comedy.
Okay.
So I was born in 55, and so the 70s and 80s are really big for me.
Right.
And I remember a lot of the comedians from that time. Can you discuss a little bit your feeling, your opinion about the evolution? I mean, back then you had like Lenny Bruce and Kennison and Carlin and
Richard Pryor.
and they could get away with a little bit more, I think, back then than we're allowing them today. I mean, some of these guys won't even go to college campuses anymore, right?
Yeah, I have mixed feelings. I think that there's times change, demographics change, people change, cultural mores and folkways change, what people find amusing and entertaining. Look back at the Honeymooners, right? I mean, certainly Jackie Gleason was an incredibly funny, talented, especially like a physical comic, right? But like one of the premises of the show was he was always this far away from beating his wife. One of these days, Alice, right? To the moon. And he's waving his fist. Is that something that would you consider that today to be an acceptable form of entertainment? So there's these things that times change, just like making fun of different ethnicities, making fun of gay people, making fun of Asians or Hispanics, like a college campus. College campuses, I'm sure, are significantly different demographic makeup. It depends on, where you are, than there's certainly a lot of places were 20 or 30 years ago. But then there's also Lenny Bruce got thrown in jail.
I know.
I don't know if there was ever like a golden time or a high time for comedy. I always think that there's always these ebbs and flows of what people like and don't like. I mean, for me, the most two incidents recently were 4 people walking out of a small coffee house because somebody made a joke about Jesus, and then somebody else saying that you can't and shouldn't make fun of the president. But then, I know of another show where somebody, used a pejorative for gay people, and a couple got up and walked out because they didn't think that was their speed.
In one way, comedians have always done that. They've always been that abrasive or mirror to society, right?
Right.
And so I guess you would almost expect them to kind of want to do that again today, or not be afraid to do that again today. But I think that they are kind of afraid, aren't they? I mean,
if you go around and look at places, you can, I think that there's, in some ways, the feedback loop has been democratized, so that 30, 40 years ago, if you went somewhere and you didn't like it, if you're a real nudge, you'd call or you'd write a letter. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And now you just have to go to your phone and give a crappy Yelp review or post something on their Facebook page, on the business Facebook page. And then the management can say, oh my gosh, look at this. We're getting feedback. We're getting negative feedback because of this. So we don't want to do this anymore because of that. So I think that kind of immediate response digitally has kind of made... it's made some businesses a little more reluctant to allow people to push the envelope in their establishments.
Is that because they don't understand comedy or the place of comedians in society? I mean, could you put a Carlin out there nowadays, or could you put a Kennison out there? What would happen if...
I think so. I think that there's guys... I'm trying to think of... There's Anthony Jeselnik. There's a ton of comics that do incredibly what people would consider... Many people in many levels consider... offensive or edgy or controversial. And so
even Eddie Murphy was pretty provocative at times.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of it. And it's kind of funny because you go back and look at some stuff and some of them you're like, that doesn't really...
Yeah.
There's some stuff that is timeless. Some people's material is timeless, and some of the other stuff Boogie in your butt. He was an incredibly talented guy. It was very funny, but maybe they were allowing him some, artistic license.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I'm not sure whether, everybody likes to complain.
Which can be good.
Which can be good. And then there's also, we always have like a built-in nostalgia kind of a thing where things were better when I was at this age or whatever. And I think that is, I think almost everybody has that things always look better in retrospect and all that. And there's a tendency to not want to appreciate the moment that you're in.
So as comedians today, let's say you're writing a joke. Do you think that they are writing it with a bit of that in the back of their mind, that they got to be maybe a little tentative? Or can they just put it out there, if they think it's funny?
Yeah, I think, if you listen to a ton of contemporary comics, I don't think you'll see that they are censoring themselves or altering their styles. I know that there was I think it was a Jerry Seinfeld or Bill Burr that talked about not wanting to do colleges.
It was Jerry Seinfeld, I think.
I think maybe it was Seinfeld. But again, he's also like a 60-year-old dude.
Yeah.
So I think that there's this notion about times change and people's tastes change. And so my bit just doesn't have the resonance with that 20-year-old crowd. A lot of comedies like Elks Clubs and fraternal clubs and things like that, and fundraisers and things. So you're talking anywhere from mid-20s to 60s and 70s. And the other thing too is that people who are in their 70s now, they were smoking weed and streaking.
We might have been.
Yeah. So you think about that like 40 years ago, people in their 70s had relatives that were Civil War veterans and things like that. It's weird to, how much that time marches on. And like I said, now you think about, it's just an old person, somebody who was naked at Woodstock, their grandma.
Bad picture.
Sorry.
Bad picture. So are there people that you feel nowadays have the name recognition of like a Carlin, a Robin Williams, Kinnison, Lewis Black, now in the 2019, or is there yet another level to come?
Well, one of the things is that there's kind of all these different levels of success. So there's people that become, YouTube celebrities with millions of hits, and they're not necessarily doing his set on the Tonight Show. I know what's the name of the guy? Bo Burnham. So Bo Burnham he's a young guy. He's probably in his mid to late 20s now, and he was a YouTube guy, and he did song parodies on YouTube, and I think that he sells out big venues, and he became he has his own Comedy Central special. Yeah, so there's the kind of the old steps to get to success have been altered by people can become an Instagram celebrity or what have you without necessarily having to go through the old club circuit and getting the nod at the Montreal Comedy Festival or something like that and getting seen by people in the industry. Now people can create their own things, and if people like them, then you're going to pay attention to the guy who's had 3 million hits on his
It's interesting,
sketchy corny sketch that he posted on YouTube,
because they kind of skipped the whole filtering process, right? As comedians, I was noticing on your interviews with a lot of them, they all talked about paying their dues,
sure,
and working their way through the system, having other people help them once they've realized that they were serious and they were going to stick around. But these folks kind of go around that, right?
That's not
necessarily good.
Yes and no. In some ways, I think that funny is funny, and if somebody's funny and they're reaching a group of people that may not have seen them, then they're filling in a spot. And in other ways, too, I think that in some ways, I think that is kind of a good thing, because sometimes showbiz and things like that aren't necessarily always a meritocracy. You know what I mean? There is who you know, and this person is this person's kid, and so we're going to give him a foot up and getting into our club.
Right? You could be blackballed, right?
You can, yeah.
I would think, that would be real. So I could see the downfall to that.
Sure.
If you're somebody who decides they wake up one morning now and they want to be a comedian, what would you recommend they do? What's the first thing they do? They go visit a comedy club? They go watch something on YouTube? What would you recommend?
Yeah, I would recommend watching stand-up comedy, and watching contemporary comics that you like. Watch some Comedy Central, watch some of the evening shows, the late-night shows like Conan O'Brien or Jimmy Kimmel.
And what are they looking for? What are they trying to size up when they see them?
I think you watch how it's done. Comedy's it's not really something that is like a mathematical formula. It's not even like music. Like music, you can kind of look at music and mimic that and all that. Comedy is just this weird thing that, who knows what it is that makes us laugh. I think whatever it is, it's somehow this thing, and it's this weird, laughter is this weird thing it's like an uncontrollable human response to something that it gives us pleasure, but it's an intangible. It's this weird thing. What is it that makes somebody laugh? Well, some people love Monty Python and other people think it's stupid, and some people love the Three Stooges and other people think it's the dumbest thing on the planet, and some people like puns and other people cringe at them, and some people like impressions and other people don't. So watch comedy, and if you're able to make your friends laugh, you got to step up. You're now along the path of, I can evoke that response from other people. But then you have to develop an act. You have to write 5 minutes of material, which is the basic kind of measurement. So 5 minutes, and then you do 5 to 7, and then around 10, and then 10 to 15, 15 to 20. So 5 to 7 minutes, you're an open micer. You get 10 to 15 minutes, you're an opener. 15 to 25 minutes, you're a feature act, and maybe you can finish out a show for 25 minutes, and then you stick around and you develop a 45, 50-minute act, and you're a headliner. You're at least a closer. Headliner is technically somebody with a name that you recognize. A closing act is the last person on the show. You keep on writing and developing, and really one of the most important things is to really try to do your own material. There's a lot of people, or not a lot of people, but there are people that watch other people's acts and take something that has inspired them. They borrow it and all that. And if you develop that way, you're going to be using other people's stuff that works. So you're taking the hard work out of it, which is getting out there and throwing your own stuff out there and watching it sink or swim. Like use a Rodney Dangerfield one-liner. Chances are people are going to laugh at it. So you generally you want to create your own thing, and you want to be creative and interesting in an uncontrived way. Yeah, people will laugh at fart jokes, and people will laugh at the 1,000th Arnold Schwarzenegger impression that they've heard. But, you're not necessarily recreating the wheel. Whereas if you can do an impression of somebody that nobody's ever done an impression of before, or make people think about something that's very common and mundane in an entirely different way, that's the hard work of comedy. And then getting people to listen to it, and then laughing. That's the hard work.
Do you guys ever hate playing at Elks clubs?
Yeah, sometimes those are the funnest things, though. You go to a far-flung place in Maine or northern New Hampshire, and there's people that don't necessarily have live entertainment, and so they're very appreciative of it, and so you get a very real and honest response. In some ways, like in Boston or New York, people can be a bit jaded. They've seen a million comics, and it's not anything that they're gonna, hey, let me buy you a drink, or here, sit out. The club is gonna give you a nice dinner and all that. There's 500 other guys in line to want to perform tonight. So next,
I can imagine everybody wants to go to Vegas.
There's some people that just like doing stand-up. So there's one good friend of mine who is an incredibly talented comic, and somebody said, well, why wouldn't you want to do your own TV show? Why wouldn't you want to have your own talk show? He's like, I just like performing stand-up. And if I'm able to continue to do that at a, modestly successful level and, making a living at it, it's good enough for me. That's really what I like to do. I don't necessarily want to sell at a stadium. I just want to be able to go to a couple of clubs a week and perform and have a good time.
Do people, once they find out you're a comedian, do they like, hey, tell me a joke?
Yeah, that's a general expectation. Yeah, my usual line is I'm not on duty. Yeah, good for you. I tell people, like, what do you do for work? You want to give me a free dental exam?
So you've been doing this for 20 years plus?
A little over, yeah.
Okay. Are you tired of it?
No, I still like it. It's fun. It's weird because in some ways it does strip away the magic of it. You know what I mean? Like I produce shows now, so that's like a little bit of a different thing where you're trying to get people that compliment whatever particular room you're at, and that's a different way of kind of exercising your comedy muscle is to do it from that end. And then I've done up here with Doris Ballard, who've taught a couple of comedy classes through her Laughed in New Hampshire organization. So that was kind of fun, teaching. Again, you can't necessarily teach comedy, right?
Just going to ask.
But you can give people the tools and the fundamentals of what it takes to try. You can't make somebody funny, really.
Right. Are there people who who should not be on stage?
Yeah, usually like the market kind of ends up filtering them out. It's like a bad ground of coffee. They ultimately, if you're disingenuine, if you're not really that funny, if you're somebody that's prone to have a conniption fit or react to a crowd and just not do the job, ultimately booking agents will stop using you. And if that comes to the case, and these people try to create their own thing. But
I used to watch Whose Line Is It, or what was the name of that?
Oh, yeah.
There's folks who are leaders and there's folks who are followers.
Right.
And you'd see one guy, he has that thought real quick, and then someone else kind of mimics it a bit. And you could tell that they didn't have that ability to be original.
Yeah.
And they're not funny. They actually are detracting from the humor of the skit. So I was just curious if in your industry you had that same kind of why are you here?
Yeah, there's some people that time has taken its toll on their ability to continue to be talented, I think. There's some people, medical issues have kind of taken over their lives and things like that. And there is the merit to bowing out of things gracefully, and I think that's kind of one of the things I fault our country for, is that we have this, it seems like there's a lot of people that just don't know when to call it quits. Like, all right, it's time to go. You've done a good job at doing that, and now it's time to pass the torch on to somebody else who can do the job.
Comedy, you said you always wanted to do.
I did.
I personally, I never thought, man, I want to be an actor, even though I've been acting for a long time. I've never thought that. So to have that drive, to have that focus early on is pretty impressive. Are there things now that you think, okay, I have things I need to do yet?
Yeah, so I'd like to write a book. I'd like to do an album. I'm somebody that, unfortunately, I do a number of topical things. Mm-hmm. And the problem with that is that topical stuff has a shelf life. So you're not necessarily developing your act further along because you have these things that 6 months later, there was a Gore Vidal called the United States of Amnesia, right? People don't remember things after a certain amount of time. So this really great joke, boom, and that's it. And then you just have to get
shelf
something.
Life.
Yeah, it's got a shelf life. So, but yeah, I'd like to maybe within a year or so do an album recording at a venue of my choosing.
Have you ever wanted to perform with someone? Not necessarily like Laurel and Hardy or Abbott and Costello, but there's some strength in that, I would guess, on some levels. Do you just like being by yourself, or have you ever thought about the back and forth of teams? I mean, there aren't hardly any, are there?
Yeah, there's not too many comedy teams around. When I started, there was a couple of guys named Matt and John, and they were around for about 6 or 7 years. And then out of Boston, there was two guys named Zito and Bean. Chris Zito was still doing comedy. He does radio. And there was a guy named Steve Bean, and he actually just passed away from cancer. And they were a team for about 10 years, too. But, yeah, the comedy team thing is... The thing about the comedy team, I think the tough thing about comedy teams is that comedy looks spontaneous. A lot of times, comedy teams don't look spontaneous. So it looks like much more of a play or theater or kind of an improv thing as opposed to straight stand-up, And so I think that, that's the old Robin Williams thing. Oh, he just gets up there and it all flows. And
You do cocaine and stuff.
and a ton of the stuff that he does is stuff that's already been done, that's already there, and he just, the magic of it is making it look like it's the first time that you're doing it. And so the comedy team thing just doesn't quite have that. Yeah, it's a rare type of person that has the ability to make that look spontaneous, impromptu, and it just looks more like a canned back and forth.
Yeah. Have you done any film?
Yeah. So I've actually done quite a bit of film and TV over the years. I saw your
demo reel. I didn't see any film on it. It was a lot of commercials.
Yeah, so I've done a ton of commercials over the years. Conway Office Products was the first one. It was the guy at the office party photocopying his butt. So that was my first commercial. It was the first audition I ever went to for a film, for a commercial, and I got it. So I had a really hot run.
For one.
Yeah, I did think with 3Com. Did a one for MasterCard with Errol Morris. I don't know if you know who Errol Morris is. He's a director that did a number of really good films. And the most recent was called Wormwood, and it's a series on Netflix. So watch that.
Is that a Western?
No, it's about the MK Ultra experiments that the CIA did back in I believe it was I think it was either the 50s or the 60s, and they experimented with LSD on people. And there were volunteers in the Defense Department, so that they weren't unwitting people. They were participants, but the story surrounds this one guy that from the time that he took the LSD to the time that he went to his death out of a window from a hotel in New York was like 12 days. And so it was about his son trying to, this is really funny stuff, by the way. The son is trying to find out what actually happened. So Gerald Ford ended up apologizing to the family. The family settled for like $1 million. And it kind of ruined the son's life. I think he had been like a designer, the art school designer. And it basically, it consumed him trying to find out what happened to his dad. So the story was that both the father was killed and the son's life was ruined. And you never really quite know fully what happened, but it's a really well-told story. So this guy, Errol Morris, is just a phenomenal interviewer and can really, and then there's some like reenactment stuff. So anyhow, so I did a commercial with him, and if you have Netflix, I'm in a movie called The Strange Name Movie. It's
thanks for those 3 minutes.
Yeah, it's a documentary about people with funny names.
Brilliant idea.
And yeah, so the director is a guy named Richard Tilken out of Boston, and I think it's Boston Digital Media, or Boston Digital Productions, and just kind of a fun, very lighthearted, entertaining movie. It's like an hour long, and there's an old guy from Lebanon, New Hampshire. His last name is Frankenstein, and he's just like this crusty, cranky old guy. And the guy used to call and leave messages on my answering machine. And he says, and then the book came out, and they called even more. And I'm like, the book came out in like 1818, buddy. What are you talking about? And there was a woman whose name was Coburn, was pronounced Coburn, but it's spelled Cockburn, C-O-S-O. And some guy named Donald Trump. And then, oh God, there's a whole bunch of funny names.
Yeah, I was watching it. When I was watching it, you could feel the pain. Because as you grow up as a teenager, you're always afraid. Even if you have a regular name, you could be picked on. Sure. I felt so bad for all of those people. Like the husband and the wife. And then there was a guy named James Bond.
Oh, yeah. What was the husband and the wife? Was Linda and Paul McCartney.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they were almost in tears over having to have their name like that.
Yeah. It's quite an interesting thing. So that's a fun movie. And that was a couple of years ago. The other comic that's in it is Paul Nardizzi, and he's very funny. He gets some airtime too. I was an extra in a couple of movies. So there was a Larry David movie called Clear History that was an HBO production that I was an extra in. I don't think I ever made any actual screen time. And then I was an extra in Fever Pitch with Jimmy Fallon, Drew Barrymore, and they shot a bunch of that down at Fenway Park. The funny thing about that movie was a Farrelly Brothers movie, and it was premised on the Red Sox being losers. They're shooting the movie, and it ends up being the year the Red Sox break the curse. And so they had to the irony. They had to rewrite the whole movie. They had to kind of change the whole thing because the entire premise of the movie was shattered in real time. So it was kind of fun there for, I think it was like 2 weeks. They shot it in Fenway Park. So you'd go there 9 o'clock at night instead of about 2 in the morning, and they'd be shooting these different scenes, and half the stadium's filled with inflatable dolls and things like that to make it look like a crowd. And so it's just kind of fun hanging around Fenway Park. And a couple of scenes, I'm sitting a couple of seats away from Fallon and Barrymore, and so that was fun. And then the first movie that I was in, again, was just an extra background, is the artistic term. And it was the Boondock Saints. So it was, so that was my 1 degree of separation away from Ron Jeremy. Yeah. And so Bob Marley, the comedian, was the goofy detective. I can't remember his name. But anyhow, so the opening scene was shot in Boston. Most of it was shot in Toronto. But the opening scene in this church in Boston, and when Jimmy Tingle played the priest. And so Bob sent out an email to a bunch of comics and, hey, they're shooting a movie. We need a bunch of extras. So probably 20 of the 100 people in that scene were a bunch of Boston comics. So
you like that medium?
Yeah, I really do like film. What I like about film is that you can really take your time, and you can do lots and lots of takes, and you can do all kinds of things before you have the final product. So it really is this kind of this multi-pronged artistic effort. You've got directors and producers and writers and actors and lights, and there's all these things that go into making something good, and you get plenty of shots at making it good. So it really is this. It's a collaboration, and it's this long process. It's fun because when you're doing it, just like a 30-second commercial, and you're talking 100 people working for a day. Just to actually shoot it, never mind how much production time to get the scene, the settings and the locations and all that. So it's a very, very fun medium to work with and to finally see the vision. People have these visions, and they take these visions from their brain and they put them on paper or print them out, and they they make it happen. And when it works, it's such a phenomenal thing. So I really loved. Ultimately, I was born in '65, so I'm one of the first generations that kind of grew up with like TV and media, kind of this all-encompassing part of our lives, you know. And so I really liked film, and I really liked watching TV and things like that.
I'm enamored with the process.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating thing, and like I said, when it works, it's a great thing. When I watched 2 movies this weekend, was with Black Klansman, Spike Lee's movie, which is very well done, and it's great because it's like early '70s, so it's got the great music. It's got obviously a pretty inspiring story, and it's got some really heavy elements to it, and then it's just got great scenery. So it's got the clothing, the bad paneling, the cars, and all that. And then I saw the Freddie Mercury one there,
Bohemian
Rhapsody. And again, I've always liked Queen as a band, but never really put a whole lot of thought into it. And it's just neat to see other people's interpretations of other people's lives.
Yeah.
Just stuff that I didn't know about him and how the group came about. And so it's great. It's really, I love film. I really like watching that whole process come about.
I love being on the set and you're watching the monitor and 6 inches away is chaos. But what's in that little frame is just, it's so peaceful. There's things happening. And you look around and there's like 15 makeup people. There's costume people. There's set people. There's people with lighting things holding. It's fascinating to me how it just all comes together. And you never see that other part of it.
Yeah, I had an audition for, I think it was a Showtime series. And it was being shot down in Boston. So anyhow, I did the audition, and they liked me. So they brought me back to do an audition on set with the principal, the woman who wrote it in an accident. And so did the second audition, they liked me. So it was down to me and 2 other guys. And so it was being shot in like a $3 million mansion in Newton. And so I show up, and like there's a police officer who's kind of got the road cordoned off, and they tell him my name. I don't have your name on the list, buddy. He wants you to go back to the main office, which is 2 miles away in some industrial area. So I pull in and I get out of my car, and there's like a Teamster guy. Hey, pal, this is a close set. Get the hell out of here. I'm like, oh, gee, I'm going to get my ass kicked by a Teamster. And then luckily one of the casting people, no, he's supposed to be here. So anyhow, I do it. And I came very close. I actually got a call from the casting agent who says, I'm calling you because you didn't get it. I'm like, oh. But in some ways, I'm glad I did because it was for a really unsavory character. So I'm glad, I'm glad I didn't get it.
Last summer, I got a chance to be a body double for Burt Young.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Remember Burt Young?
I sure do. From Rocky. And he was Rodney Dangerfield's driver and kind of bodyguard, and not Easy Money, but Back to School.
He's like, now he's getting like 180.
Right.
He's slow moving.
Yeah.
And they had to he dies in this movie.
Yeah.
And they can't have him fall down.
Oh, jeez. So you got to fall down for him.
Yeah. So I'm from the back only that you can see. And I have to fall down.
Oh, that's funny.
But what's crazy is, again, so they're filming him, and he's got a gun. He has a live gun.
Right.
And so you see him in the frame on the monitor, and just off screen, I swear it's 6 inches away, is the guy who handles the firearms, the safety guy. And then there's all of these other people because he's a big name, too.
Right.
And if he hurts himself, they're all, God forbid he shoots himself or something. But it was just amazing to see. There's people with fog machines. There's people his handlers are all there.
Sure.
They're all within 10 feet of him.
Right.
It's amazing to see what goes on in those things. Oh, what's coming up? What are you doing?
Well, what am I doing? I produce a monthly show in Lowell at a place called the Luna Theater. And it's this very cool 80-seat theater. And it's called Mill Number 5, and it's a 4th floor, like pedestrian mall. It's got coffee houses and record shops and photo studios and yoga studios. And so every 3rd Monday I do a show there, and I produce the shows and just always have a great time, always fun little shows. What do I have coming up? I think I'm working with Gilbert Gottfried at the end of the month, at the end of April, I think, at Headliners in Manchester. And then, and then...
he still tours?
He still tours, yeah. He's so funny. Wow. So speaking of which, and we actually talked about what people are allowed to say and not say, or if you go see him, your jaw will be on the floor at the caliber and the material. He has this bit about, I get all of my information about autism from Jenny McCarthy. Jenny McCarthy says you're not supposed to get a vaccination because it gives you autism. So I didn't get my 2 kids vaccinated. And I'm proud to say neither of them have autism. they both have polio. So he's doing these jokes, and he says, I get my information about autism from Jenny McCarthy, and the crowd just goes, oh. So his ability, he can pretty much joke about anything and everything from Hitler to, he has not been cowed, let's put it that way.
So when is that show?
I think that's the end of April. I think it's like the last Saturday in April at Headliners in Manchester.
When's the next time you're at the Apple?
I think I'm going to be there the 23rd of March. Are we in March now? Yeah, we are.
Yeah, we are.
Gosh.
I know.
Yeah, the 23rd of March, I think, with Mike Norvell, a guy from Boston, very funny guy.
Do you have certain people that you prefer to travel with? Or are you trying to actually introduce newer people?
So I did a show up at Gene's Playhouse, and the guy who headlined is a newer comic. His name is Ray Harrington. And I'm still a bit of the old school guy. The people that I grew up watching are the people that I tend to want to use and all that. But, a number of them aren't even with us anymore. My good friend Bob Seibel, who was one of the really funniest guys, passed away a couple of years ago. And then some have moved on, some have left comedy. So there's that well is a little bit more shallow than it used to be. So I'm now getting used to using different people and people that that I'm not necessarily have been watching for 20 years. And Ray's one of those guys. He's originally from Maine and moved down to Rhode Island, and it just became a headliner. And it was one of the kind of a fast track guys. He's like 6'4", big, funny guy, and he's got a movie called Be a Man. So it's
really?
And I think that's a Netflix one too. And it did the movie, the film festival circuit with that Be a Man, and it's kind of an interesting movie about what is being a man in contemporary America. He goes into the boxing ring with, I think, Manny Pacquiao. It's quite the...
Beats Tyson, I guess, but not by much. Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah.
So are there places that you haven't played that you'd like to play?
I would actually like to play in Vegas sometime and probably out on the West Coast.
Have you done any casinos?
I've done Foxwoods and then Turning Stone, which is one out in New York. I think that's it for casinos. Oh no, there's a little one in Rhode Island. I can't remember the name of it. But so I've done a few casinos. And those are sometimes like the crowd is a bunch of people that have lost all their money. So they're not exactly in a laughing mood. They're looking to escape, but not necessarily laugh.
How do you get to the Vegas point? What makes that happen?
I think that's one of those ones you kind of either have to go out there or just have developed such an act that you've got a big following.
Did Peasy say he went to Vegas?
Yeah, so I think there was I'm trying to think of the name of the Tropicana used to use a lot of guys from Boston. So there was, I think they had one in Vegas and one in Atlantic City. So I've never done Atlantic City or Vegas. But yeah, so a bunch of the Boston guys would play the Trop. And then I'm trying to think, there's one in Laughlin that a bunch of the Boston guys play. And there was a guy named Vinny Favorito was a Boston guy, and he used to have his own show in Vegas. And yeah, but Boston is a great breeding ground. Boston in New England. Yeah, it's a good breeding ground for comics. So definitely lots and lots of comics move on to bigger and better things. I mean, one of the biggest comics in the country is Bill Burr, and he was one of the guys that when I first started comedy would come in and, all right, he's doing a set now, so so you got to do 5 minutes instead of 8.
What do you do in your downtime? You end up find yourself go visiting clubs and listening to other guys, or do you just stay away?
Not as much, I mean, I'm trying to think of the last time I actually just went to a show. Eesh. I generally don't. I mean, sometimes if one of my friends is around in town, I'll go see their show. But part of me doesn't like to do the kind of cross-pollination or cross-contamination. You go and watch other people's acts and you can absorb some of their stuff. So you kind of want to try to... Yeah, so sometimes you want to try to keep your own head, basically. And so... And just the other thing is that when you're, 3 days a week, you're watching other people do comedy anyways.
Yeah.
I like music. I like hanging out at coffee houses. I like to read. I like to cook. Spend time with my family and trying to get back in. I like walking, but yeah, trying to get back into doing a little more, things like hiking and things like that. Maybe do some camping this year. But and what else do I like to do? And and I do like live performances. So I did go see my nephew and his son. Their mother took me to see Christmas Carol at the Palace, and I'm getting old. I was like weepy when like the opening set was just so beautiful. I'm like, oh my God, that's so. It's like this big song and dance number. You know, the street waifs and all the Victorian English costumes and great tunes and stage, the theater too. You know, the lighting now is so unbelievable. So there's all these things that they are able to do to make productions, look, like movie like.
Yeah. And it's so transformative. It takes you away.
Yeah.
And because it's the 3D, you forget that you're watching something. You're actually almost participating silently.
And I went to Tupelo Music Hall a couple weeks ago and saw John Lodge, who was the bass player for the Moody Blues. And so that was a great, great show. Wow. Very, very fun. So I always try to stay culturally relevant or, culturally aware and kind of follow the news and follow politics. And, being a New Hampshire guy, I like politics. I've met just about every president in the last 20-odd years, there's just lots and lots of decent entertainment in New Hampshire and New England and all that to tap into.
That's the truth.
I'd like to have you come if I get my show back up and running, I'll come and talk about theater because, like I said, I really love watching people perform. It's a fun thing.
Well, you see a good comedian, that's a gold mine right there.
I guess that was one of the things that early on when I started watching live comedy. So I went to high school in Milford, lived in Milford, and then the next town over was Amherst, and they had the Amherst Country Club. And they started it during the comedy boom in the 80s. They would do Wednesday nights at the Amherst Country Club, like 8 o'clock. And just incredible amount of talent that rolled through those doors.
Really?
Oh, yeah. So, Steve Sweeney and Kevin Meaney and Dennis Leary and all of those cats. Yeah, and Dana Gould. There was just a whole bunch of really great. Diane Ford and Melvin George. All these really great performers. This guy, Melvin George, this whole thing he was a smooth guy, and he would come out on stage and would pull like a drink out of his pocket and pull that cigarette out of his other pocket. It was really very funny. And I think he still performs. But it was just such a great experience. And I just remember some of the nights, just the amount of laughter that those people were able to pull out of me was just an unbelievable thing.
It's an art.
It really is.
Being in theater, I really appreciate the art form of it. And having seen some of the videos you did, you really get a good appreciation for the work. You just think and you're right, a good comedian makes it look like it's not a lot of work. Like anybody could just get up out of the audience and do it. Yeah. But they couldn't. There's so much that goes into that. And working the crowd, being with the crowd, and it's quite a craft.
It is.
Well, my friend, thanks for being here.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Ray.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to check back for my future episodes where I'll be speaking with Michael Curtis, Andrew Pinard, Jim Regato, John Campanello, and Doris Ballard, just to name a few.